Hello, everyone. I'm Anup Kumar. I'm a researcher working with the Bioinformatics Group and the Freiburg Galaxy team at the University of Freiburg in Germany. In this talk, we will be discussing Introduction to Machine Learning, where we will briefly discuss what machine learning in general is, what are the different types of machine learning, and what are the various applications of machine learning. Let us begin. Machine learning is a broad field that provides various methods for predictive data analysis. But what is predictive data analysis? We can look at it by an example. Let's suppose our dataset contains images of cats and dogs. As human beings, we can easily categorize which images we see cats and which images we see dogs. Machine learning provides an automatic method of categorizing datasets in such a way. There are various types of machine learning. It depends on what kind of data set we have. For example, the most popular types of machine learning are supervised learning, where we have class labels defined for our data set. The second type of machine learning is unsupervised learning, where the labels are not defined. They do not come with the data set itself, and machine learning methods find the categories in the data. The third type of machine learning is reinforcement learning, which we are not looking at in this course. Each machine learning method comes with a number of hyperparameters. What is a hyperparameter? A machine learning method defines a set of hyperparameters, and the performance of this machine learning method depends on the values of the hyperparameters. Researchers who create machine learning methods, they provide default values of these hyperparameters. But when we are applying such machine learning methods on different data sets, then these hyperparameters values need to be optimized, because no one knows the ideal values of these hyperparameters for a particular task. Therefore, to optimize or to find the best values of such hyperparameters for a method using a given data set, there exists a certain hyperparameter optimization methods. We will look at grid and random search, which are the hyperparameter optimization approaches. Then we will go through what are the different learning and evaluation techniques of using and applying machine learning models. Then we will end the talk with various applications of machine learning. Machine learning provides various methods to learn patterns from data. When it has learned certain patterns from data, key insights inside the data can be found, and these insights can be helpful for further downstream analyses. What are these key insights? These could be a certain patterns or features of a data that is helpful for categorizing it into separate or distinct categories. Machine learning comprises of different fields. It's not just one field. Machine learning comprises of different fields of study. To do machine learning in an effective way, one needs to have basic understanding of statistics and probability. Then the user needs to have some working knowledge of programming in a particular language, maybe in Python or R. Then the person should be familiar with data analysis and visualization techniques. Machine learning, as discussed, is a broad field, and it can create predictive data analysis from multiple fields. For example, it can create such analyses for protein and DNA sequences. It can also be applied on weather data to predict to storms and to estimate the temperatures. It can also be applied on financial data to predict stock prices. Additionally, it can also be used to estimate the prices of houses. Then it can also work on image data sets. Let's discuss what are the different popular types of machine learning. There are two popular types. One is supervised and another is unsupervised. In supervised machine learning, the categories or the classes of data, they are provided with the data itself. For example, if we have images of cats and dogs, and then with each image, a label, cat or dog, is provided, then that becomes a label data set. And when we train a model using such a label data, then our task becomes classification task. There is another type of supervised learning is regression. In regression, we also have labels, just like in classification, but the labels here are real numbers. For example, if we have a task to predict the temperatures, then the task becomes the regression task. The second type of machine learning is unsupervised. In this type of machine learning, the labels or the categories of data do not come with the data itself. A machine learning method finds the categories in the data automatically. One such unsupervised method is clustering. An example of clustering method is k-means. When a clustering method is applied on a data, then it tries to find the categories of the data by learning the features. Another type of unsupervised learning is dimension reduction. Biological data sets are usually high dimensional. By high dimension, we mean that we have a large number of features. For example, if we have genetic expression data, then the number of features could be 20,000 for human beings. Then this is a very large number. And all these genes may not contain useful information. So they need to be removed so that our downstream analysis becomes computationally easier and faster. And when we try to reduce the dimension of our genetic expression data, then we have to apply dimension reduction techniques. For example, PCA, or if we do a neural network method, then autoencoders can also be applied. Let's look at what classification is. As we discussed before, classification is a supervised learning approach where classes are defined with the data itself. On the right, we can see that we have two classes in our data. Class 1 is represented in blue color and class 2 is represented in violet color. Then the classification tasks automatically learns this boundary between the two classes. And this is the core idea behind classification, to create a decision boundary that divides or separates two classes. Here, for simplicity, we are dealing with only two classes, but in practice, a data set can contain more than two classes also. The decision boundary that a classification method learns can be linear or nonlinear. In practice, the data is not usually separable by a linear boundary. More and more data sets have nonlinear boundaries inside. And that's why when we use linear methods for classification, they may be fast to produce a decision boundary, but they are not optimal. The algorithms or the methods that we use for a classification task, they are known as classifiers. And examples of classification tasks could be if we have genetic expression data and the labels of that data is tumor or no tumor, then the entire task of predicting tumor or no tumor becomes a classification task. The second type of classification task could be rain or no rain. When a machine learning method learns on different features related to weather data, then it can predict whether using the current set of weather data, it would rain or not. Then these are discrete classes. Let's look at an example of classification dataset. This dataset is a breast tumor dataset. The rows that we see is one sample, and the columns that we see is the feature. For example, one feature is clump thickness. Another example of feature is cell size, then cell shape, and so on. The last column, when we see here, is the target. That says whether a particular row has a cancer or not. So each person is defined as a row, and each column defines a feature. In general, this is how classification data looks like. You have a certain number of features or columns, and then as the last column is the target or labels which are defined. Then let's look at regression. Regression, as discussed, is also a type of supervised learning where labels come with the data itself. The difference between classification and regression is that regression labels are real numbers. For example, if we have a task of predicting temperatures, then the task becomes regression task. A regression method finds a fitting curve through our data set, as shown in the plot here. Then we have our labels for regression task defined as blue circles. Then regression method tries to find a decision boundary or a fitting curve through the labels. In general, it can be a straight line curve or could be nonlinear curve. Just like classification tasks in practice, linear curves do not define the boundaries that well. The methods that we use for regression are called as regressors. A few examples of regression tasks are forecasting temperature. If we have a weather data and then using the weather data, a regression method predicts what could be the possible temperature, let's suppose tomorrow at noon. The second example of regression task is to predict stock prices by learning on financial data sets and features from the financial data sets. Another task could be predicting the prices of houses based on certain features. Here we can look at an example regression dataset. This is a body fat dataset. The target in the last column we see is the body fat percentage. And each such number is a real number. For example, 12.3 is the 12.3% body fat. And this body fat is calculated or based on certain features. These features are, for example, age of a person or a weight of a person, which are defined in pounds, then height of a person, and then thickness of neck, chest, and biceps, and so on. Just like in classification, all the columns, these are the features of a data set, and all such features are associated with a target. Each human being is defined as each row, and each row defines the data of a person. For example, first row, the person has an age of 23 and a weight of 154, and then height is 67, and the neck thickness is 36.2, and so on. And that person's body fat percentage is 12.3. Next, we look at what are the hyperparameter optimization approaches. As we discussed before, a hyperparameter of a machine learning method is a parameter whose value need to be supplied by the user for a particular task. And the performance of the chosen machine learning method depends on the value of the hyperparameter. A machine learning method can have multiple hyperparameter and their values differ from dataset to dataset. And therefore, the ideal values of such hyperparameters are not known. Therefore, a few approaches have been developed to optimize the hyperparameter approaches for different machine learning methods. For example, here we can see one ElasticNet regressor, which is a regressor and used for regression task. It's a linear method. It has 4 different types of hyperparameters. For example, alpha. Alpha takes real numbers between 0 and 1. Then there is another hyperparameter, which is normalize. It can take 2 values, true or false. So the data type of this hyperparameter is Boolean. Then the third hyperparameter is fit intercept. It is also a Boolean type, which can take true or false values. Then the last one is TOI, which are also real numbers and can be defined between 0 and 1. What is the best combination of these hyperparameters? We do not know. It depends on the type of data set that we are using. To optimize the ideal values of such hyperparameters, we can employ 2 approaches, grid search and random search. These 2 approaches are simple to use and also easy to understand. However, there are more complicated approaches such as Bayesian search. Grid search takes a certain range of each hyperparameter. For example, when we use grid search, then for alpha, we provide, let's say, values between 0 and 1. We provide 4 different values, let's say 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. Then for normalize, we provide true or false. Same like normalize, we provide true and false for fit intercept. And then we provide another 4 real numbers for TOI as well. Then how many different values we have in together? 4 values for alpha, 2 values for normalize, then 2 values for fit intercept, and 4 again. Then how many configurations now we have to test, which will be given by the multiplication of 4 by 2, which is 8, then by 2, which is 16, and then by 4 is 64. Now, the grid search approach provides 64 different types of configurations of 4 hyperparameters that needs to be tested on a particular data set to find the best one. Random search is similar to grid search, but in random search, we provide the ranges of the hyperparameters as only the starting and end values. For example, if alpha takes a value between 0 and 1, then we can just provide only the range for alpha, for example, 0 to 0.5. And also for the real numbers, which is TOI, then we can provide a range between 0.5 to 1.0. Then random search randomly samples values for the specified ranges. So here we do not need to define the exact number of values for each hyperparameter. The benefit of using random search is the number of combinations that it has to test to find the best one is less. For example, in grid search, we saw there could be 64 different configurations that need to be tested to find the best one. But for random search, it could be a lot lesser. Then we go and learn a bit about how we can train a machine learning model and how we can evaluate it. To do that, we use different kinds of approaches to split the data sets. One such example is k-fold cross-validation. Let's suppose our data is represented by this horizontal line, and it has, let's suppose, 100 examples. Then if we follow 5-fold cross-validation, then our 100 examples would be divided into two sets. 1/5 of the data would be used for validation, and the 4/5 of the data is used for training the model. And this is for one iteration of learning the model. Then for the second iteration, it takes another 1/5 of the data, which was in the training data before, but now the earlier validation set is combined back to the training data. So in the fourth fold, we see the yellow blocks here. These are the training sets, and the blue one is the validation set. And we iterate it for k number of times. Here, k is equal to 5. So we have 5-fold cross-validation. So in each fold, 4/5 of the data is used for training and 1/5 for validation. And then it goes on for k folds. If we have, for example, 3-fold cross-validation, then we will have 3 iterations, 1, 2, and 3. And then the entire data is divided into 3 equal parts. Then 2/3 of the data is used for training and 1/3 of the data is used for validation. Machine learning learns on the training set and then evaluates the learned model on the validation set. For a good learning, the performance on the training set and the validation set should be similar. Otherwise, it may lead to overfitting in the data. There is another type of learning where the complete data set is divided into 2 parts, training part and test part. Then the machine learning model learns on the training part, and then the evaluation is done on test part. So here, none of the data set used for testing is seen during the training. Usually we define what percentage of data would be for training and what percentage for training. One particular example is using 80% of data as training and 20% for testing. But it depends the kind of tasks we are performing. Sometimes it's also 50-50%. Sometimes it's also 75%, 25%, and so on. Let's look at some of the applications of machine learning. We start with bioinformatics field. In Bioinformatics, machine learning is widely used for different predictive tasks. For example, predicting 3D structures of proteins. If we have an amino acid sequence, a machine learning model takes it as input and predicts the 3D structures. The 3D structure of protein is important to understand the functions it can do. One popular approach to predict 3D structure of protein is to use AlphaFold 2. We can use DNA methylation patterns of humans to predict whether a particular drug is sensitive or not. DNA methylation patterns can also be used to predict chronological human age also. CT scans and X-rays of lungs can be used to train a machine learning model that can predict whether a CT scan or an X-ray shows infectious regions in lungs or not. In other fields of science and technology, machine learning is also widely used. For example, in the field of computer vision. The self-driving cars, they contain camera that can have a wide range of vision, which automatically identifies objects and obstacles. In the field of natural language processing, generative AI is very popular that can generate languages just like humans do. It's also very popular to recognize speeches. For example, we speak and then a machine that is trained to recognize human speeches converts our speech into normal text. Similarly, there are multiple applications of machine learning. To summarize this session, we discussed about what machine learning is in general, what are the different types of machine learning, for example, supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Then we a little bit discussed about what is hyperparameter and how the values of hyperparameter can be optimized using grid and random search approaches. And then we saw what are the learning and evaluation strategies for a machine learning model using k-fold cross-validation or splitting the data into train and test. Then we end the session with the different applications of machine learning. Thank you.